Welcome to another one of our ICA briefings, Institute for Contemporary Affairs at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. I don't know if you noticed, but our last briefing by the Commander of Southern Command, General Gallant, received a great deal of attention in Haaretz as he disclosed the presence of Iranians in the Gaza Strip. So it seems our briefings are always a source of new information and new angles looking at events that are transpiring in the Middle East around us. I think last time Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser appeared at the Jerusalem Center, we couldn't print the text. But now he has left his previous position as the head of research, senior head of analysis of Israeli military intelligence, and he's had a number of very important positions before that in the intelligence branch, particularly as the head intelligence officer of Israel's of the Israeli Army's Central Command, prior to his promotion to being the head of analysis for the IDF. Of course, he has covered in this period of time some of the most important events that have transpired in the last number of years, from the events with the Palestinians, the Second Intifada, the period of Operation Defensive Shield, and particularly the events in the East, like the Iraq War, and of course Iran. Today we have asked Brigadier General Kuperwasser to speak about Iran's vulnerability and the implications of that vulnerability for the West as a whole. And I'm sure, given his rich background in dealing with Iran's involvement in the region over the last 5 or 6 years, he will have information that's very important for all of us. Just a few other points. Recently, Brigadier General Kuperwasser was a fellow at the Saban Center for Middle East Policy at the Brookings Institution. Today, he is Vice President of Global CST, a security company. He has a BA in Economics and Arabic from Haifa University, MA in Economics from Tel Aviv University, and the list just goes on. So without further ado, I'll ask General Kuperwasser to deliver his talk.
Thanks, Dory. Thank you very much. One thing is problematic with what you said, and this is that each such a meeting provides some new information. Challenge, I hope I would not provide new information, but only new way of looking at those things that we all know. But it doesn't seem that we always take the right steps, even though we know the situation. And talking about Iran, I think it's worthwhile to start with the beginning in order to understand what's happening. Going back to the revolution, the Iranian revolution, because Iran, when we speak about Iran, when I'm speaking about Iran, when I say the word Iran, I mean the Iranian regime, because there are many people in Iran and everyone has his own idea about how things should be going. Iran is a revolutionary regime. That's something that we have to keep in mind when we talk about it. Many people, when they deal with the Iranians, believe that you can convince them to adopt our kind of logic. But when you deal with a revolutionary entity, it is very difficult to find ways to their mind, because most people in the West have stopped to be revolutionaries ages ago. And it's very difficult to understand how a revolutionary mind works. And ever since 1979, this regime has not ceased to be a revolutionary regime. They are in the midst of a revolutionary endeavor they have taken upon themselves. And it doesn't stop by changing the regime in Iran. The Iranian revolution is not only an Iranian revolution, it's an Islamic revolution. And that's why the mission that the Iranian revolution has deals with changing the world, not changing Iran. There are some steps. After changing Iran, first of all you have to change Iran in order to have a base to work from. Then you change the region. Then you change the world. And this is what this revolution is all about. There are many questions that the revolution is facing ever since it came to power about what is the right way to move forward and how you balance between national necessities and revolutionary necessities. And these tensions, in many cases, have forced the Iranians to push a little bit weaker on the revolutionary activities. And there were times when the Iranians felt that the pressures are such that they have to focus on national issues. But this is not the case since somewhere in the second half of the last decade, and definitely not in the last few years. The Iranians clearly feel, and this fact that Khatami was representing the idea that national interest should come first, lost power. It was a clear message from the Iranian regime that the international revolution should proceed with full capacity, and that national interests are not necessarily right now in contradiction with the international revolution. The other thing that we have to remember is what is this international revolution all about? It's not only about power sharing. To a large extent it is about power sharing. They do want Iran to have a stronger position in the world. And not only Iran is a representative of Islam. And Islam in the way they understand Islam, the way they interpret Islam. Because they are radical Muslims, as we all know, the regime. But the focus of this revolution has to deal with two elements. One is the question of justice. What Ahmadinejad is saying all the time is that justice should be done. And the situation we are living in is a situation where Islam is a victim of a plot against it by the international arrogance. This is the word used by Ahmadinejad, international arrogance. The international arrogance is doing everything within its capacity to make sure that the Muslims would not be able to be where they should be, to get the kind of treatment by the international community that they should get. The international arrogance is committed to keep the Muslims as blue-collar workers, to exploit their resources, oil and so on and so forth, and to force upon them, in the context of this plot, all kinds of political regimes and political realities, like, for example, the existence of the State of Israel, that would serve the international community in keeping the world order the way it is. That's why justice has to be done. We have to fix this problem. Now, the main question is, what is the meaning of justice? How do we know when justice is done? This leads us to the second part, or this leads us to the power sharing issue that I mentioned before. When the power will be shared in a different way, then we should know that justice is done. But, as I said, justice is not the only issue. The other issue they fight for is this idea of what are the values upon which the world order should be built. And they do not accept the set of values upon which the Western world has established the world order. The entire idea of accountability, the entire idea of the laws of war, how war should be fought, the entire idea of the elements that we believe in, liberty, the human rights, mainly the idea that the purpose of states is to ensure the capabilities of their citizens to pursue happiness. This idea is unacceptable. They come up with a totally different set of ideas that they took from their own culture, and this is why even Khatami at this time suggested that there should be some sort of a cultural dialogue, and that the Iranian values are superior to those of the West, of course. The idea of having cultural dialogue is in order to teach the West what are the right values, to save the West from the strange ideas that it has developed. And this revolution stands for these values. We have to understand that. One of them, for example, is Vilayat Faqih. But it's a full set. And the idea of Vilayat Faqih is that the Lord is the one that has produced already. It's not produces anymore. There's a big question about whether ijtihad is something that is legitimate or not. Can you come up with something new today? This is why they are fundamentalists, because they believe that everything was already invented. And the Lord has already said His word, and we just have to interpret it here and there, know what to do right now. And this has implications on everything that they are struggling for. Now, when they speak about the world order that they want to change, talking about implications for the West, what are we ready to do as Westerners in order to defend our values? They, for example, as I said before, do not accept the idea of how wars should be fought. From their point of view, this is a part of the plot, the way wars are being fought. If wars were to be confined to violence between combatants, this would eternalize the control of the West and eternalize the prevailing world order. That's why this should be changed. Wars should be fought against civilians. It's not even in every war civilians were affected. But in their perception, civilians are the main target. And that's something we have to understand, because we face Hamas that gets it, and Fatah and everybody that gets a lot of Iranian support, and we face, of course, Hezbollah. This support comes with this idea. The fact that Hezbollah launched rockets against civilians for 34 days in the last war, this was done by people, all of whom have gone through the Iranian brainwashing machine. And came up with it, and none of them have felt that something is wrong with it. Because this is the idea. That this is the way wars should be fought. I say because obviously a lot has been said about would the Iranians use the nuclear weapon if they have it or not. They don't have the same inhibitions that some other, especially Western societies have about doing so. For them, killing civilians is totally legitimate. Moreover, even killing Muslims is legitimate. Because, first of all, some of them are to be announced as non-Muslims, and some of them will find their ways to heaven, because the important thing is the next world, not necessarily this one. I recommend in this respect, for those who didn't read the article by Noah Feldman in the New York Times a few months ago, I don't remember exactly when, about the logic of using nuclear power by Muslims, by radical Muslims. It's a very good article. And but it's true, the inhibitions are not there. Secondly, the idea of accountability. They fight against it. And they try all the time to create more areas where non-accountability can prevail. That's because accountability means that somebody is responsible for the use of force. Their idea is don't be responsible for your use of force. In the case of the Korean A, for example, the people that gave the weapons to the Fatah were so cautious as to scrap the serial numbers of all the weapons they gave to the Fatah, just to make sure that Iran would not be accountable for what is going to happen with these weapons. And again, they do it all the time. And these are the main elements in which the world order should be changed. Eventually, one of the elements in which it should be changed is the sharing of power. And Iran should become a superpower. And if one of the characteristics of a superpower is that it has a nuclear weapon, then Iran should be entitled to have a nuclear weapon and become a superpower and represent the Muslims. Not only Iran, it represent Iran as a nation as well, but the Muslims. And that's the way we should look at what this regime is looking for. It's important because revolutionaries are turbulent by nature. They don't look for some stability. Stability is their enemy. Stability would eternalize the prevailing world order. They want to change it. That's why they need perpetuous turbulence. That's what they need. And we should keep that in mind, because all these efforts to convince the Iranians to support the idea of regional stability are dead on arrival. There's no way the Iranians are going to accept the idea of regional stability. The Iranian regime its essence is to oppose regional stability. This doesn't mean that for a short period of time they cannot adopt steps that would help temporary stability. But their ideology is against it. And this is why, when the situation is dangerous, they would back off, like they did with the agreements they had with the Europeans on the nuclear issue, and freezing some of their activities for a while. But they always explain to the Europeans, again and again and again, this doesn't mean that we are going to really put it to an end. It's only for a short period of time and only in return for something that would enable us to move faster once this short period of time would elapse. And this is something that we have to understand. We just don't understand it. We believe that we can convince the Iranians to adopt a policy that would support stability. I don't know why we do that, but somehow that's the way we behave. The Iranian, when we come to our days, not to the ideological roots of all of that, we have to understand that the Iranians work under certain assumptions that, unfortunately, seem to be more or less correct. And if we are to discuss the vulnerabilities, we have to understand what are these assumptions and to see to what extent they are really well-based. First of all, they believe that the West is too weak and too divided to fight for its values and to fight for this plan, this plot. The West has this plot, but is not committed to support it. And that's why Ahmadinejad and some others repeatedly say that there's not going to be a military move against Iran. Because this is almost common knowledge in the Arab world, in the Middle East. The West has lost the stamina that is needed in order to fight wars. It's still fighting some wars, but it's just looking for ways to end them and to run away. And because of that, the West is not going to be involved in a war against Iran. That's the Iranian assumption. Secondly, we are not alone in our initiative to change the world order. Maybe we were a little bit alone at some point in the beginning of the 90s, But for quite a while we are not alone. And in this policy we have support from Russia, China, and many other elements within the third world. But especially what's most important is Russia and China. Even the Europeans are not totally happy with the prevailing world order. If the world order states that there's one superpower, nobody likes that. And because of that, nobody is going to support the Americans if they are going to try to impose an American solution to the problem. And this gives us a lot of room to maneuver. We shouldn't be worried too much. The Europeans in this respect are not going to really risk their economic interests, not directly with Iran, and not in a wider perspective. If the prices of oil are going to rise because of growing tension between Iran and the West, the Europeans don't like it. And the Arab frustration is such that you cannot expect the Arabs to really stand against it. They don't like what's happening, they can say all kinds of words, but not only that they're weak, in the end of the day, most of the people in the Arab world would eventually identify with Iran and the confrontation between Iran and the West, and would pose such pressure on their governments that the governments would not be able to move against Iran or to support anybody who's going to move against Iran. And because of that, we can continue with our efforts to change the world order. Yes, we are going to face all kinds of pressures. But if we are committed to our goal, we can proceed. Because one of the main ideas, one of the main values that we believe in, and that the West doesn't believe in, is that suffering, readiness to suffer, readiness to sacrifice is something that should be very highly valued. And we should be ready to sacrifice, we should be ready to suffer. And in this respect, they're ready to suffer economic difficulties and these kind of things. I mean, again, I'm talking about Iran's regime. I'll come in a minute to the vulnerability. Because of that, I think that with all due respect to everything we have done so far in order to put pressure on Iran, and there's a problem here, because when we look at what we've done, we are very pleased with what we've done. In the last 5 years, since this issue became an international issue, we've moved it from something that nobody even knew anything about, to a focal issue on the international agenda. We have exposed so many new elements of knowledge about the Iranian policy at large and in the nuclear context in particular. And we even managed to have the international community do something about it in the Security Council, which is really impressive. But if you ask yourself from an Iranian point of view, what has happened in the last 5 years, they will tell you that they've managed to cross so many hurdles and reach a situation where they are just on the verge of crossing the last hurdle, in spite of all those achievements, nominal achievements of the West. And these are nominal achievements. And nevertheless, since the title is Vulnerabilities, I'll speak about vulnerabilities. The first vulnerability, in my mind, is a potential vulnerability. We don't know yet if it is a vulnerability or not, but it might turn out to be a vulnerability. And this is that it might be that the Iranians don't read correctly the West, and Israel in this respect. They believe that they can move forward and nothing's going to happen. Their analysis of what the West has done so far is that actually they don't mean business. While what President Bush has said, and what some Israelis have said, that Iran becoming a nuclear power is unacceptable, is actually true. And somebody is going to do something about it if nothing else works. Somebody is going to take real action about this matter and put an end to the Iranian initiative. And we have to say, this kind of mistake was repeatedly done by Islamic radicals in the last few years. Again and again, they've done the same kind of mistake. They believe that the West is hollow, empty, is not going to fight for its values, and the West has surprised them again and again and again. Defensive shield is an extremely good case. The attacks in Iraq and in Afghanistan is a good case. The kind of way Israel reacted to the kidnapping of the soldiers in Lebanon is another good case of that. And Nasrallah admitted that he made a mistake in this respect. He said, well, I didn't believe they were going to do something like that yet. And I know I wouldn't have started doing it in the first place. I mean, the radicals have this dogma, and it's very difficult for them to understand that at some point there is a straw that breaks the West's back, and it does react. So it might be that they are wrong. Unfortunately, until now, I cannot say that they are right, that they are wrong in this respect. That's for the time being, I think they are right. The second issue that is really a make or break in this respect is the issue of Russia. Are they right in the way they read Russia or not? Because most of their analysis is based on Russia. And it's not a surprise they keep going to Russia and sending delegations to Russia every fortnight. They believe that the Russians will always stand on their side and would prevent a resolution in the Security Council that would make it possible for the United States to strike Iran or to take really severe economic measures. It's hard to say. The Russians, on the one hand, are really the Russians that the Iranians see. They do not dance to the American flute on that issue, and they have interest in Iran, and they sell them arms, and they have supported the Iranians in giving them the excuse to which they cling in order to explain why they have legitimacy to have a nuclear capability. At the same time, Russia is not that stable on that issue. And it's not only the Iranians that send delegations to Russia, the rest of the world sends delegations to Russia as well. There's a reason to believe that the Russians may at one point change their mind, and they did. And with the trend we've seen recently, and I think Undersecretary Barnes referred to that yesterday, the trend that we see recently is that the Russians are moving very slowly, not full-heartedly, in the direction of cooperating with the West on the Iranian issue. Is that going to be to the extent that the West needs them? I doubt very much. Basically, I think the Iranians are right on the Russian issue. But it's a vulnerability because so much is built on the Russian policy. And we have to understand in this respect that we have to double our efforts in order to explain to the Russians what are the implications of the nuclear Iran. Third, the domestic front in Iran is not united on this issue. Although the Iranians are making an enormous effort to create the impression that there is only one voice coming from Iran on the nuclear issue, this is not the case. Coming back to what I said at the beginning about the arguments between nationalists and revolutionaries, the nationalists understand that there is much at stake, and that if they make any mistake on the first two assumptions that I mentioned, the